One of the attempts of this conference is also to expand the discourse on imaginations and placings through having a conversation between academicians and also practitioners. And I'm very proud to and happy to introduce the first practitioners panel, Eva Stotz, that we already met, and some of us are familiar with her work from the screening last night. So Eva Stotz is a documentary film director and producer with an alert eye on social phenomena. She works in linear, interactive, and performative contexts. The usual use of the documentary format is the common thread that runs through her work. Her documentary films, Devil Hides in Doubt, that we saw yesterday, Global Home, 1 Billion Steps and more are shown and awarded at various film festivals all throughout the world. Her interactive work, Field Trip, pioneers in being an open source platform with Creative Commons licensed material and was awarded with 2 Lovies European Internet Award and won the Best Interactive Documentary at Melbourne Film Festival. In the last years, she's intrigued of telling the story of gentrification in European capitals and currently works on 2 film projects in Marseille, The Last Pirate of Marseille, and in Hong Kong Caribbean Coast, supported by Robert Bosch Foundation. She's also the author of the book Documentary Film in Its Making. In 2012, Eva Stotz founded the production company Ronja Film in Berlin. 2015, she received the Tarabya Scholarship by the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Goethe Institute, Istanbul. Eva Stotz runs international documentary film courses with a strong focus on personal storytelling with art institutes such as Harvard University, German Film and Television Akademie Berlin, Behçetçi Universität Istanbul. Since 2017, she continues the curation of global video installation labor in a single shot started by Harun Faruqi and Antya Ehman. Since 2020, she works on co-creating an ecological hub of social change in Alentejo region, Portugal. I think I have a lot of thoughts and ideas about how the idea of imagination, especially her talk today, Life as Raw Matter, expands the idea, but before I take more time, I think it'll be right to give you the platform. So please, Eva Stotz, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you so much for this invitation to this conference. It was very inspiring to me to look back at my 20 years of filmmaking under the premises of this conference. Practices of imagination and placing of imaginaries, and it has led me to new discoveries in my films and exciting discoveries. I hope you share the excitement with me. So I even scrutinized my early works in this regard, but don't worry, I won't torture you with my first attempt to filmmaking. I will rather focus on 2 works in which I think the themes of this conference show itself the most interesting way. First, we look at Sollbruchstelle, which was screened here yesterday, and where we'll show a couple of clips for those who haven't seen it. At the beginning of this film, there was a very deep feeling and a great intention to make a film about the zeitgeist in Germany that I encountered in the year 2006, which was strongly determined by the themes of anxiety and work. This made my imagination blossom, but the concrete path to this film was not at all clear to me. The search for the nucleus of the film, why I have to make this film, the negotiation of my imagination with reality, and the magic involved how this film manifested in the outer world, that I will talk about today. And then I'd like to also mention another example of my work, Field Trip, an interactive documentary, which was made more than 10 years later. Here, the movement to develop it was in the opposite direction, meaning the starting point was an outer space. It was 300 hectares of an empty field. And the challenges here was to fill this emptiness of the physical space with emotional stories, inner worlds, and ideas and imaginations of people. So I would like to keep this panel very practical. I'm a practitioner. As this conference brings together so many different heads of different walks of life and practices, I'm very interested to hear your thoughts and associations and feedbacks. So there will be a couple of moments to share this, so please keep your questions in mind. So in the first chapter, I would like to discuss the truthfulness of documentary spaces and the dilemma of the real. Like almost all things, a documentary film begins in the imagination. The absurd thing is that we then set out and use camera, microphone, and editing technology to create a depiction of life, a film that is generally regarded as real. A documentary film is supposed to show reality in clear contrast to fictional storytelling, where script and actors already draw a clear line to reality. But how can I make a seemingly real film if each person sees the world in a different way? And if the hundreds of decisions I make up to the end of a documentary film are no longer transparent, but provide a finished image that then shapes other people's perceptions, how can I bear this responsibility? Because every decision determines the image that is created in the end. How I position my camera, which angle I take on the scene, whether I tell the character and show the environment in a distant shots, or if I build up an emotional proximity with close and dynamic images, which other voices I include, which questions I ask, what I cut away, where I use music, and which one, where I unconsciously influence the narration with sound design. With the impeccable color correction tools that we have today, I can easily mix materials that were shot at different moments, pretending they are from the same moment. Not to mention the decisions made for purely technical reasons, or aesthetical ones, or political ones, or those motivated by sponsors, decisions that result from power relations in the editorial team, from the view of audience figures or supposedly successful narrative models. This to say, it is impossible to make a documentary film without manipulating the pure information. The very presence already of me and my camera and my team influences and changes the reality. So instead of seeing documentary film as real, I see life as raw material. And a documentary film is a reality amongst us that is only seen by one person, the author. I am alone in it, and as the author, I am ultimately only committed to my truths and my values. If my protagonists see themselves misrepresented or even jeopardized by my portrayal, I have to be able to deal with it. There is no authority to consult in this. It is therefore important to find a way of dealing respectfully with the stories that are entrusted to me and still make a stand in the world that is not necessarily pleasant and right for everybody. The two projects I'm using as examples today are independent productions. This to say that I was allowed to find the standards for how to tell these films exclusively within myself. My inner dialogue could be conducted indefinitely, always over many years, and sometimes to this point of self-destruction. Before I would like to move on to the first film, Sollbruchstelle, I just want to thank Helen as well for opening this thought of reproducing the world in such a beautiful way, because I feel it really, we dived into this vastness of seeing the surrounding and now seeing the surrounding in a condensed way of a film. So, Sollbruchstelle, predetermined breaking point, as the literal translation is, and the title says it all. The personal motivation and the universal approach, a heated dialogue between the inner world and the outer spaces. It all started with the desire to capture a zeitgeist, a certain attitude to life in Germany in 2006. I had returned from a long stay in East Africa, so my sense of normality has changed. And when I landed back in Germany, I noticed everywhere how present the themes of work and the associated fears were. Fear of losing the job or not finding the right one, fear of doing the wrong job in the wrong system, fear of colleagues and superiors, or of the development of the global labor market. I noticed how this was overly present in my perception, and that is actually always a sign of a film theme that comes knocking at my door. I will show you a few examples just to demonstrate a bit the feeling and the view I had at the time. Can we have it a bit louder? Oh. Okay, and I'm showing you another clip just to continue that. Opa. Okay. So, as you can see here, I try to capture a mood with a certain poetry and dreaminess. So, for example, the first clip that you saw with the sleeping people, I discovered that most of the passengers on the first S-Bahn trains on the line Wannsee Berlin City Center were asleep. So when they woke up, they looked into a 16mm camera, and I was able to explain them the project. And in the other example too, I try to use the light and the situation that allows us to look into people's faces long enough to get a sense of an inner world, which of course every viewer will and can read and interpret it differently. So showing these examples illustrates an important stylistic device that I use in Sollbruchstelle. Instead of taking the audience by the hand and pushing their thoughts in a certain direction, I relied on an audience that thinks and feels for themselves and draw their own conclusions. Back to the process of developing this film. So I had to find out what is the germ cell, the nucleus of the film for me. Because recognizing my individual imprint through life experience, my family, society, nationality, this allows me to find an approach that is authentic. What is familiar to me allows me to have a sharp sensor for truth and authenticity in the film material. What I feel is probably also important to others. What I generally care about, I can make tangible by asking honest questions. And if I follow my own burning questions in the process of making a film, I have the stamina to go the long way of a film and to dig deeper all the time. So this could be summarized as an emotional motor, the driving force that comes from the center of myself, that sees my imagination of the world and the movement of my heart towards the subject as the first and highly fertile energy, the primordial soup, so to speak, in the creation of life, where the search for images, voices, and places in the outer world begins. Because this topic of work and anxiety spreads so confusingly vast and far in front of me, I begin to research what event in my biography has produced these sensitive sensors for this time in Germany in 2006, shortly before the economic crisis that hit in 2008. And one image keeps on coming back to me. It's the image of a man who goes to his company every day, but everything he does is in his office passing time. He has nothing to do, nor he is allowed to talk to anyone, and just as no one is allowed to talk to him. That's the announcement from above. His only task is to endure the loneliness and degradation. For me, that was a terrible image of wasted lifetime and absolute futility. I know this man very well. He's Franz and my father. So I experienced this time firsthand, and also it was more than 10 years in the past when the film was made. I still had many unanswered questions about it. My father had also never really recovered from this life experience and was still stuck in old attempts to explain it. And an unconscious impulse for this film was certainly also to redeem him from the story and give the story the attention it has never received. I knew for sure that I didn't want to make a personal film, but the journey of this film had to start in the place that was closest to me, and therefore the most painful. I honestly couldn't listen to these endless, repetitive, and to my ears, terribly self-pitying monologues anymore. The film was also meant to be my release from that, as a final working through and transformation of the pain into an art form that allows us to look at yourself from a distance, to share your story and put it up for discussion. So I made an appointment with my father for a 2-day interview. In this context of this interview, in this conference, I would like to talk a little about the choice of the location for the interview. On the one hand, It's very important aesthetically because the location has to function as a visual container for a work story that largely takes place in an office. It also forms the framework for an oppressive mental space in which my father found himself and about which he will report. And on the other hand, as a physical space, it has to give my interviewee enough security to be able to open up. Of course, the lighting situation and acoustics are also crucial for the organization of the shooting, as well as the conditions such as access and location fees. While free associating and cycling through Berlin in search of this location, I felt drawn to Berlin's Hansaviertel neighborhood, where the brutalism of the 1960s had produced several buildings with elements of raw concrete, béton brut. I found the right place in the Akademie der Künste by Werner Düttmann, a closed space but with opening, raw concrete and yet light, and water as an element that radiates magic and calm. I'm gonna show you a clip from the interview place and from Franz speaking. Oh yeah, it's right there. Okay, so you can see it's getting very existential in the name of a company. So for those who didn't see the film yesterday, here's a short summary of the protagonist Franz's core story. So Franz worked for 30 years in the automotive industry in the same company. One day he was dismissed for operational reasons without any discussions or explanations. He was on the verge of permanent retirement pension, and his boss changed and the new one gradually replaced the entire team. As the company continued to expand and recruit, my father went to court, assuming that he could win the battle against the global company as an individual. He actually won in court, but the company simply did not implement the points he had fought for. They, especially the personnel manager that he was referring to, shifted the dispute to a psychological level and tried to break the disruptive factor with bullying methods. For example, imposing a contact ban on him, he not being allowed to speak to others and his colleagues not being allowed to speak to him. They wanted him to finally resign of his own accord. So starting from this story, I interweave other narrative strands in an associative way, which I will discuss in the following. In this interview, the first thing I shot, I followed my most pressing question that I was trying to understand since years. What circumstances led to Franz's decision to endure this degrading treatment? And how does such a lack of perspective arise in relation to his own creative power that he even tried to sue his way back into this company where they clearly didn't want him anymore. About the shooting structure. As this film was still made at the film school, the German Film and Television Academy in Berlin, I had all the freedom to adapt the filming structure to the narrative and not the other way around, as it's often the case. I had divided the shoot into 5 phases beforehand with the intention to develop new questions after each shooting phase and looking for signs and answers in my environment. My experience showed that the more concrete the questions of the research are, the more clearly the answers present themselves. The entire reality changes for the sake of the film. It's as if the reality focuses and condenses on the topic of interest. This is a magic that only exists in documentary film. I had the feeling that I was actively inviting chance with this method. By not presenting a tight shooting concept, but leaving a lot of space, I offered life itself a chance to co-write the script, and it did so in a very unexpected and exciting way that I could certainly not have imagined. So after filming this interview, another point took center stage for me, which I wanted to investigate further. The behavior of the colleagues. Why did Franz colleagues of many years respect that contact ban? What system encourages this subtly brutal form of antagonism? Shortly afterwards, I read an article about acting training for managers and actually found a course that agreed to let me film this weekend seminar. When I presented my intention with the film and my open approach to the film, with this film to the group, one of them gave me a clear feedback. He said in German, wer zu allen Seiten offen ist, kann nicht ganz dicht sein. So if you're open to all sides, you must be bonkers somehow. So this made it clear how unusual this essayistic approach is in our goal-oriented society, which naturally also produces linear narratives. It is much more often about having a thesis and proving it. In practice for this film, however, I saw that circling around and illuminating the topic from different angles is the right approach. In this form of essayistic documentary film, it's not about finding the answer, but about developing the search before the eyes of the viewer, in front of the eyes of the viewer. So after filming the managers, learning to understand their body as a trademark and the walk from the elevator to their place as a catwalk and these kind of things, I wanted to go back a generation to check when this fearful imprint of the world of work begins. I uneasily recalled my own visit to the Career Information Center at the end of finishing school and couldn't believe that these trips still existed for students in their final years of schools. And they had only become more daunting. Great for the film, terrible for the poor students. With both the managers and the students, I asked afterwards who would be willing to be interviewed, and I was incredibly grateful for the statements that 2 random participants gave me. And I will show you one of them in this MIZ, Berufsinformationszentrum, the career center, where I met Saskia. And I show you a little bit of the experience. Oh yeah, here we are. just letting it run a bit for you to see the associative method applied. So I was with the managers, I was with the students, then I felt I would like to go even further back into younger age. And there was one story that I heard many times from my father, which was a story that has always touched me deeply. He described that in great detail a scene that had taken place one day when in the times of his loneliness in the office, right outside of his window. There was a bridge, and a group of sheep were being led across it. At the beginning, the young and the fit ones were walking, and later came the old ones, and at the very end came the limping and injured sheep, and one collapsed in front of his window and lay there. Later, a car stopped, and, in his words, a torn and dirty shepherd got out with a club foot and a hump and lifted the broken-down sheep into the boot. In the way my father told the story, we can sense that he identifies strongly with a sheep that is simply thrown away, sick and old, and his archaic desire to be part of a flock with a good and caring shepherd is very tangible. The perception of this scene through his eyes was, of course, extra charged, and I wanted to find out what thoughts this story inspires in children who have no connection yet with the world of work. And I heard in a radio program about a teacher who does philosophy lessons with children, and I asked for cooperation. So I rewrote this story from my father into a children's story and told it to the class. And they talked about it afterwards, and clearly recognizable positions also emerged. I want to show you this clip. Okay. So this leaving gaps for the coincidence to write itself in the film brought me to very unexpected places. So at some point, I was really searching for the image that I can use to translate this solitary confinement that the protagonist talks about all the time. And one day I cycled past a huge billboard that was fixed above the road, and in this billboard, with an advert for a flat screen from an electronics chain, a seat was fixed, and on it a man. A big arrow pointed to him with the words, "He waves back too." And sure enough, if you waved to this little person 20 meters high above the road, you saw him waving back. And he was there breaking the world record for sitting in a flat screen billboard sort of thing. So I immediately felt the connection to my father's story. Two men in an exposed situation doing absolutely degrading work. It was like the translation of my father's inner and outer space into a completely another reality, very different but full of points of contact. I was able to do an interview with Stefan, the man in the poster, and realized that Franz and Stefan are even connected in more ways. They both talk about their big dream, their desire to fly and see the world from above and understand about humans and how we are with each other. And they both shared the same pain, the thoughts of suicide, which my father was able to successfully suppress, and yet it bursts out of him at the end of the film. And 2 years after this job that Stefan has done, he becomes severely depressed and he took his own life. So using this associative essay form meant to schedule more time in the shooting, to leave the spaces, and especially in the editing. Editing this together is like putting a puzzle where the pieces fit only in an associative way. So scene A and scene B are not necessarily in a logical sequence. There's a gap that the viewer has to fill. The skill is to ensure that this gap is not too big so that the viewer cannot make a connection and gets lost. We call those the resonance chambers, because it's something that was seen in the scene A resonated in this gap and was kind of made draw the connection to the next one. So, and if these resonance chambers work well, everyone fills them with their own experience and thus sees their own film. What emerges is more than the sum of the individual parts. It made it possible to hold up a mirror to the viewer, which can lead to personal realizations, the starting point for examining and changing one's own thoughts and reactions. And of course, this is often the desire when making a film, in a way to create a Cartesian moment and to release the viewer differently than before the film. And of course, to create a film that touches on a universal core in our human experience and is therefore a contemporary document, but one that can be timeless, and each era adds a different contrast when watching it. Before I introduce you to the other documentary project with associative and this time viewer-determined interactive montage, I would like to give you some space for feedback, and also for those who have seen the film yesterday, a couple of you approached me with questions, and I'm curious to hear what the effect the film has on you. Thank you. So your first question, what changed from my initial idea to the end? Interesting enough, it's very often the case, the first writing, the first brainstorm, the first digging into the ideas and my imagination has a lot to do with what is there in the end. I completely lose that in the making of the film and I let myself go, but when I then read back what I wrote firstly, a lot of things come back or are in the final film. Of course, what I didn't imagine are the voices that I got and the concrete characters and finding this man in the billboard and this kind of things. This was really out of my control, and also this was the first time I worked like that, because I also like to have a clear vision and then kind of following that. But this topic was so vast, and I felt so not yet there to make a stand on how I want to tackle that I needed to have this security of saying like, okay, just step by step, and after every new research, which I really considered the research in finding a point, I developed the new questions, and that was very relieving to allowing myself not to know where I'm going. I had in the very beginning the idea of having even one fictional part. I thought of reenacting in a very surreal way this office scene, and I had the shooting, everything was already set, the great location, and then I realized the documentary power is so much more strong. When you mix it, it's very difficult to get to this level of authenticity that you have in a documentary footage. So I decided against it in the end, and indeed I didn't miss it. Also, I had a hard time working with the interview of my father. I thought first to just have it as a research and not use it in the film, just also because I listened to that story so many years that sitting in the editing and listening it again and again was like a torture. But I saw it's like the bloodline for that film, and from there I can go left and right, and I don't need to make a film about my father or me and my father, or but it was a big gift to know that story so well and to have him sharing it so generously. That it was this strong arc that I could use. There was one thing where we ran quite into personal problems, because I wanted to have the personal director, this antagonist in the film as well, and I wanted to hear his perspective, because you've seen in the film, for all of you who haven't, the personal director tries for many years to kind of make my father go, and also even expressed that he expected my father to pull the trigger, so to kind of kill himself. And then because he doesn't manage to finally make my father leave, he was dismissed, and he had 2 hours to clear his desk and had to leave. So the same horrible thing happened to him, and also this man got very sick and had cancer, and I contacted him in order to hear his perspective on the story and to really get in the angle of seeing the bigger system, that those 2 men were caught and ruined each other. Basically, one had cancer, the other one was severely depressed afterwards. And when I did this, my father was very, very disappointed, and was he was not wanting that person to appear and have a voice, and also this person didn't want to appear. He said he never spoke to anybody about this story, not even to his wife. So he was clearly not up for talking to me in front of the camera. So yeah, this was one turn that I made. To answer your second question, yes, about the general, about the personal director. The image you were referring to, this man who had the job to cut, in the film you see a lot of people doing a bit of absurd works, and this person is cutting these little branches in the winter with a very long saw on a stick, and yeah, it's endless, this shot, and I cut it after the moment where I tell the story of the personal director. No, like one cuts the other, and then you don't notice, and then you get cut. It's just like this, being the little wheels in a bigger system that's in the end inhumane. Yeah. Yes, indeed, this trial to make something that touches a universal topic that lasts and that's not bound to a very contemporary phenomena. I think that worked because, as you say, I look at this film and I see the same problems today, even more poignant and even more difficult to cope. And at that time, words like mobbing just came up. You know, my father was one of the first having a big court case for psychological bullying in companies. And nowadays, it's very much known, and the practices have been even sharpened. So. Yes, when I look back on this film in the relation of nowadays society, I think now I would make a film that's even more dark and heavy, you know. But at the time, and also it got more and more complex. Already back then, what was I think the big trouble for my father to realize is that it was not that when he was fighting or winning the court case, that then there was that person in the main center of his company, which was Fiat, not in Munich, but then in Italy, in Torino, but who could react and who could speak justice. No, the fact that this company reacts to a global market and to a global pressure, that made him really blow his mind, you know, that there's no way and no entity to speak justice on this little person that works. So the Sollbruchstelle, this title, the predetermined breaking point, I always saw in the position of the person being part of that system. And I think this got even more sharp nowadays. But yeah, the fundamental problems are in the film as they are here today. Yeah.
Can I request, yes, the two questions to be collected, perhaps?
Yeah, thank you for these questions. So let's start with the authenticity. So what I mean about the wariness I had about mixing the fictional strain with the documentary one is you feel. And this is also what I mean about the senses that I felt I'm having. You feel when somebody is speaking from their experience that is a crucial one and an existential one, and that they do to me because I asked that question in that certain moment, and of course I make a choice then what I take in the film and the editing, but I'm getting that from a true place of that person. And mixing this with something that's entirely fictionalized and set up and written and put in with actors and recreated with costumes and light, that falls in the intensity. So I've seen it in many, or I've watched a lot of films where it is done, and I feel this, the viewer instantly relates in a different way when seeing a person speaking about their issues than when you have a film with actors. It touches you as well, but in a very different way. And mixing that, it kind of has this conflicting back and forth of the viewer. So I decided to stick with the things where I felt this is coming from a true place, and this is where I feel authentic in using this. And maybe this bridges also to your question about accountability, because what I do is to stay in touch with the protagonists that I interviewed. So I was speaking with the people in the interview that I interviewed. I was showing them the film or their parts and getting their okay, and always with the possibility to discuss it. Not like, okay, no, I don't like my hair in this shot. Then I have a long discussion trying to convince them, but I try to be very transparent with everybody and not like, oh, surprise, here's the finished film. And with the situation of Stefan killing himself, where it's not instantly related also to his work in the billboard, which was the moment where I got to know him. I got in touch with his mother and asked him about the wording and what she thinks about that. And she agreed on me putting it in the film in this way, because I felt, again, you know, I'm using Franz and Stefan a little bit like a same character in this film. I merged their stories. So, and my father is speaking about his suicidal thoughts, and another one dies in that system. So I found it important to at the very end, and I know it makes the film really end with something that leaves you shaken, to see the pain that this is causing. Also, Franz, he's always very self-contained how he speaks and very reflected, and at one point it breaks and you see how painful that is and how much it tackles the dignity of people. And with Stefan, I found the same story, and yeah, I found it important to be in touch with his family and get there okay with that. So yeah. I have another project that I would like to show you. Can we continue? Yeah, we have still 20 minutes left. Yeah? Okay, wonderful. So, okay. So the other project is called Field Trip. And in this film, I'm questioning the linear narrative form in a non-linear life experience. Places, their meanings and their stories are versatile and changeable and relate to each other in a non-linear way. And so may the filmic reconstruction follow. This was my attempt. So in 2005, I made a film about the Tempelhof Feld in Berlin. The city airport was still open and people were pressing their noses against the fence. It was about longings and about the fence that separated people into travelers and non-travelers, and travelers and those left behind. The airplanes carried the ideas of the people who stayed on the ground into the sky. And when the gates of this place of longing suddenly opened, it was clear that in this politically and emotionally charged place, another film wants to be made. But the concept of a long linear documentary film remained unsatisfactory. Broadcasting slots for long documentary films are increasingly rare, and the debates surrounding the field were so fast-moving that a documentary set in stone would be outdated in 5 years' time. Tempelhofer Feld does not need a monument. It deserves a living, changeable, and moldable debate. A tangible work of art that doesn't hide the individual from the boundaries of its aesthetics and prefabricated dramaturgy and merely consume it, but invites it to step into it and thereby transform it into a more attentive social being. So in a team with web author Frédéric Dubois and software developer Joscha Jäger, the idea for a hyperdoc film, Field Trip, was born. It is the first major use case for a documentary film realized entirely as an open source documentary film and open source hyper video. Thanks to the net-like structure, the user can follow his instinctive impulses and explore the different areas on Tempelhof Field in their own narration. So I show you something for you to know what I'm talking about. Here we go. How do I come to you? Here we go. So you can always access it under fieldtrip.berlin. So you reach here on this website, which is the view above the Tempelhof Field in the middle of Berlin. And here you have 16 stories available. And maybe we just start with one so you get the idea on how we tell them. Let's start with the architect. It fits to the topic of the conference. So here we have the possibility of a jump to another story, and let's just go for it. So you see the timelines are circular, so you can always choose to stay and watch the entire movies or to go to the next one and have every time a different narration. And of course, with more films, the more exciting the different narrations become.
Ich habe ein Zitat gefunden von einem Volkskundler, Friedrich Naumann, der 1887
als Steppe mitten in der Kulturwelt und auf dieser Steppe ein Steppenleben, sobald die Sonne scheint. Nirgends in Deutschland bietet sich ein ähnlicher Anblick. Das Volk der Frauen und Kinder wandert aus den Steinstraßen aus und legt sich auf die Steppe. Kinderwagen, Bettstücke, Belieferungsromane, Felssessel, Bällespaten, alles wandert mit. Auf der Steppe werden die Stammkinder frei. Sie haben den weiten Himmel über sich und einen weiten Blick um sich. Tausende sind es, die an schönen Tagen zwischen Rixdorf und Schöneberg auf der Erde sitzen. 1897, ja. Was bedeutet Weite?
Verschwendung, Luxus. Ja, es ist schön, hier zu sitzen, aber an einem Sonntag, das Wetter ist gut, aber die Wohnungsnot hat sich ja auch nochmal verschärft in den letzten 5 Jahren. Ja, also es ist schon akut. Wenn man sich mit dem Problem auseinandersetzt, dann ist es hier unwichtig. Ob jetzt hier eine Weite ist, die ich hier nicht entspannen kann, es gibt sicher andere Möglichkeiten, sich zu entspannen.
Kannst du mir mal ein Beispiel geben, wie das mit ausländischen Investoren funktioniert?
Es sind Leute, die wollen ihr Geld anlegen in einen sicheren Hafen. Deutschland gilt nach wie vor als sicherer Hafen. Und die haben gehört, dass in Berlin auch sich Geld verdienen lässt mit Immobilien, dass es eine Nachfrage gibt, dass es vielleicht eine Shortage gibt, eine Knappheit an Wohnraum und dann steigen die Preise.
Just decided not to stay there.
Europa. Warum soll hier aus dem Ausland niemand ein Haus kaufen wollen? Das ist ja auch ein Kompliment an die Stadt. Andererseits, die Leute verteufeln Spekulanten, die nur ein Haus kaufen wollen und dann wieder verkaufen wollen. Sehe ich jetzt nicht so negativ.
Okay, I stop here and maybe we still have time to watch a little bit more. Just some more words for you to get more context of this project. So the user of this project senses how the past and the present of this moving place react to each other and tell something about the development of the society, far beyond the boundaries of Tempelhof, which here serves primarily as magnifying glass. As a mirror of the epochs, Tempelhof Feld bears witness to change, and its fate is in the hand of the citizens now for the first time. But what will happen to this huge open space is uncertain. Representatives of the city, art, citizens and business are struggling more or less strategically to realize their conflicting plans. Field Trip aims to be an example of how people can become aware of their choices, take responsibility for their city and contribute their own part to an open society. So Field Trip is a cinematic Gesamtkunstwerk of visibility, participation and changeability. Firstly, the filming in the field was organized around live events on the topics of urban development, civic emancipation, sustainability and contemporary witness talks. Being visible and tangible in the real world is and was an essential part of the field trip idea. The second pillar is participation. Hang on, I will show you the participative possibility here. You can always call and leave your story about the Tempelhof field. As part of field trip, there was a so-called story box. Where we cooperated with the Bücherbox, which transformed old telephone boxes into public libraries. For 1 year, there was a telephone box on Tempelhof Field that was equipped with this 0800 free number, where anyone could record and leave their own trace on the field story. And these recordings could be listened on the site, on the Tempelhof field, but also were integrated in the hyperdoc. And the third principle of field trip is an artistic continuation and changeability. This is why all the material, as far as possible, and software produced by us is licensed with CC by SA, so that journalists, filmmakers, and cultural professionals around the world may continue and use and modify it. Engagement needs freedom, not control. Fear of abuse creates boundaries that create new ones. The Hyperdoc field trip, like the field in its current state, stands for openness and self-responsibility. So field trips want to grow and move with the times. For us, Tempelhof Field is on the one hand a special place in itself. On the other hand, it is a stage, a projection surface on which the play social development is performed. Wherever in the world our film material can be used thematically to do another play, be it in a journalistic, artistic, commercial or scientific context. The content is freely available and may be modified. So in addition to the heart and arms and ears, this is the spirit of field trip, the vision of a networked society that holds up a mirror to itself and writes history from multiple perspectives. So I'm happy that I could introduce this project to you, as it is really something where we hope that it continues to live. The software is available, so if there's another area, I don't know, maybe in Eichstätt you have places or events where you feel they could benefit from an intertwining sort of narration, this software can be used and filled with other content. And the idea of sharing the footage, which is something that is done amongst developers since a long time, but for visual artists or filmmakers, it's a very rare thing to do. To release a film open source and have all the material available in order to be rearranged is also an invitation for all of you. Are there any questions on this, or any more wishes to see a certain episode? There's an episode with a forced labor worker who was for the first time on the Tempelhof field since she has been forced to work there in the Second World War. There's somebody who fled the GDR from the airport Tempelhof. There's Farzad from Afghanistan who lives in a temporary who lived at the time in a temporary refugee shelter. There's the air bridge present. So a lot of different. We try to span 100 years of stories on this vastness and emptiness of 300 hectares, trying to use the memory that's in the earth itself to access the emotions and the inner worlds of people. Thank you very much for your attention. Okay.